Soul Survivor is an augment for Nekros' Soul Punch ability in Warframe. It makes that ability revive allies you target it with. The range is pretty solid too. Warframe is a funny game for Soul Survivor. If you think about games generally, it seems like a pretty powerful effect to be able to instantly revive people from range, but in Warframe specifically, past the very early stages of the game, you the player are not very vulnerable. You can become very hard to kill in a large variety of ways, and you can revive many times each mission. This game's difficulty is generally built around passing or failing an objective, rather than living or dying. I mean, sure, it's nice to throw out a revive if you see an ally down. Really, it's good that Soul Punch is only 25 energy, because the benefit of using the augment to revive is only going to be modest at best, but it sure feels satisfying to do. Get out there and punch some people back to life, because it feels real good. And you know, a little more of a helping hand isn't such a bad thing. Now, with that out of the way, my approach as a player with an augment like this, where I don't really think it's all that good, but I've just decided I like it, I am going to use it, is that I still care about getting what value is there out of it. You know, I still care about where it might be a little bit better than average. And I really think for Soul Survivor, the key is that teammates, specifically human-controlled players, it just doesn't do much. They can revive for not much cost. So you've been seeing already, I've mostly been using this to revive my animal companions. Now, they revive on their own after a bit less than a minute. What's the big deal? Well, again, we're in the realm of more modest benefits in this video. Gameplay Gems here is a series about the weird and wonderful specific bits of build systems that games offer us to play around with. And my interest in Soul Survivor is about the odd experience of instantaneously reviving allies unlimited times at range being like only barely good. That's peak Warframe. But anyway, the idea is that your companion's abilities will have improved uptime this way. That's it, no more or less. So it's an augment for a Nekros ability, who I usually use to generate loot, and I'm bringing a Smeeta Kavat with me when I usually play Nekros. I have a couple of different loot loadouts, and this one I've paired with the Smeeta Kavat, partly because I can punch it back to life. The idea is pretty simple, it's just that Charm has a chance to give a loot doubling buff, and if the Smeeta Kavat is alive more often, I have more chances to get the loot doubling buff. Even with some investment in survivability mods, my poor loot-hungry cat is going to go down a lot. I still use a couple of mods that revive my Kavat faster. Restorative Bond is particularly good with Nekros because of Desecrate generating health orbs, and then Tenacious Bond, I think this is just a pretty good mod in general. I still use those because it's all about convenience. I don't think there's any virtue to specifically punching my poor cat back to life. When I'm not near my Kavat when it goes down, they make it come back to life so much faster that I feel like they're still worth it, even though they do nothing if I use Soul Survivor. As most of the footage for this video is from Steel Path defense missions, I would imagine that on the rare occasion you play one of those types of defense missions where you defend a living, moving operative instead of just a stationary target, Soul Survivor is also not bad. You know, you can revive them to stop the mission from failing, so I imagine this would be good there too. It was somewhat difficult to get a ton of footage for this video though, which is only fair. I mean, the Soul Survivor isn't that amazing. I just like it, and I think it's enjoyable to add to my gameplay experience, and I thought some of you might like that too. What you do see in a lot of this footage is that I don't particularly have a ton I need to do, even on the Steel Path. You know, for this Nekros setup, I'm keeping Desecrate active. I use Atlas's Petrify with the Orgaze augment from the Helmet system to make more loot when I get a good cluster of enemies in a cone. I might use Shadows of the Dead if things really go badly, but it doesn't come up much. And then I've got nothing. Might as well soul punch some health into my beloved companion, and now and again I'll end up with more loot for doing that. But in my mind, that's a build system working as intended. If you're meant to actually choose to customize your gameplay experience by setting up your own specific playstyle, I feel like it's all about the mediocre but interesting stuff. You can try to figure out the technically best by some very narrow definition way to do things, but it just doesn't provide much benefit to know that in most games like this. So it would be something you'd do if you found it fun. I often find that way of thinking fun. My point is that by the same token, you are meant to be able to choose to use what you want, and I just want people to hear that more. It's not wrong or worse in a way that matters to choose what you want. Everyone is doing that. There is no clear objective value in picking something that you've concluded is the best either. That's just another preference, and that's great, just no different than using something you like for some other reason in a game that doesn't particularly reward either one or the other. There are games that do reward, let's say, getting every last bit of damage, but these systems full of choice generally have the wisdom not to do that. They want you to prioritize your preference, that it just doesn't always come across perfectly well. And Soul Survivor is an example of that awkwardness. This is pretty weird to evaluate, right? First, it sounds insane. You instantly revive people for almost no cost and no cooldown at considerable range. But then Warframe has a kind of unique way of balancing player death. So what does reviving people even accomplish? Okay, Soul Survivor's value goes back down again, but it doesn't cost much to use. Really, the biggest cost is the mod slot for the augment, but if you'll comfortably survive anyway, what does that mean? So what about the cost to perform the action? Well, you've got time to use this during most missions. Anyway, you get it. The tension in all of these choices is deliberately relaxed. You will not win or lose based on a single one of those decisions. But I personally find that really interesting because it makes evaluating those options a more nuanced experience. There is no way to conclude that one is better or worse. I think a thing you often see in discussions about builds is that in an effort to explain why someone decided to use one thing over the other, they kind of maybe accidentally try to argue that it is the best choice for some reason, rather than just explaining the reasoning behind why it was their choice. And those are not the same thing. I'm not sure most people are doing that on purpose. Yeah, this is a weird one. One of the reasons I wanted to do this as a gameplay gems video is that I wanted to clarify that this series really isn't meant to be about things that are good in the game. Just pieces of design I think are cool. I kind of wish Soul Survivor was better somehow. I'm not really sure how it would be, but I like the idea that in Warframe, in a game where you kind of can give the player an ability like this, they took the opportunity to do that. So folks, I hope you have fun with that gameplay gem, Soul Survivor. Not pictured here, of course. There's nothing to revive. One of the most shockingly mundane revivabilities you'll find anywhere. You could only do this in a game like Warframe. Now that we're, for all intents and purposes, immune to mortal harm, where are we off to next?